For much of the past several decades, most Americans receive their information and political discussion from a handful of major outlets, the major television networks, major newspapers, and a handful of prominent radio programs. For conservatives, talk radio and later Fox News provided an alternative perspective, but it was nevertheless top down and controlled by a handful of gatekeepers, editors, and programmers who chose what was important. This, however, was to have an extremely dramatic change with the coming of the internet, and by extension, social media sites such as YouTube, podcasts, Facebook, and Twitter that eliminated gatekeepers as a feature. The very important driver was, therefore, a matter of technology. Key figures employed these strategies to remake the content of the conservative media. Donald Trump was a master of the new environment. He used Twitter to communicate directly to his followers, bypassing all media and making mainstream media distrust a central campaign feature. The likes of Tucker Carlson, Ben Shapiro, Charlie Kirk, and Candace Owens became popular through their podcasts and videos on social media. Instead of just reporting news, they chose to keep a constant, engaging commentary going on news events, focusing on cultural issues and engaging their audience personally. The result was the development of a potent alternative feed or a separate media system. This system did not only inform the audience, but also activated them. The audience or followers became a community and a movement, journeymen who were given talking points and a point of view. Political mobilization was decentralized, generated as much by these digital influentials as it was by traditional political leaders. This change has profoundly impacted American politics. For instance, it has created high participation and a sense of community for many conservatives. However, it has also created a very fragmented information environment, with many groups operating with completely different sets of facts and stories that make it difficult for a national consensus. In other words, the story revolves around the idea of how technology has allowed new voices to construct a self-sustaining media universe, and how that has changed the way millions of people think and act with regard to information, politics, and political identity. Until recently, we have known who the gatekeepers were in the public square. There were a few gatekeepers controlling the flow of news and political debate. If one were to watch television, one would have a choice among the three major networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC. And these networks were committed to a large audience, a middle-of-the-road audience. When it came to newspapers, the New York Times and the Washington Post were gatekeepers in the world of print. If one were to hold conservative views, one would feel that the mainstream sources did not necessarily articulate their views. Their views were highly marginalized in the media. This then creates the need for an alternative view. And that counter-narrative first found its voice through talk radio. Pioneers like Rush Limbaugh cornered a massive, devoted following in the 1990s as he took on the establishment media's narrative. He hailed to the frustration of his audience, giving them a sense of identity. This format was proof that there was a massive market for conservative media that consumers felt was for them and by them. Cable news also. The advent and rise of Fox News brought a new outlet that had a 24/7 programming schedule and, in essence, offered the alternative to the liberal media establishment. For the first time, conservatives had a visual outlet in prime time. However, though it was a strong antithesis, it was still a centralized organization. It was a single channel, and ultimately, the editorial team and management decided the stories to cover and the guests to book. Though the audience was growing, they were still looked upon as mere consumers. This was the world we inherited for a generation, a world in which mainstream media were distrusted by conservatives, but in which a handful of very powerful alternative media institutions, first radio, then cable, served as their dedicated megaphones. A conversation was expanding, but hierarchy had not disappeared. Gatekeepers had changed, but gates had not. An audience was listening, but had not yet begun to speak in its own voice en masse. Doing so would require a technological revolution, which is precisely what came. The revolution was not brought by a new television network or a radio station, but by the internet. New digital technology was brought, and it did not simply enable a new kind of channel, but instead ended the notion of a channel altogether. First, the facility to sidestep the gatekeepers entirely was now possible with the advent of YouTube and podcasting apps such as Apple Podcasts or eventually Spotify that would render anyone with access to a microphone, or even better, a webcam, potentially capable of engaging with a global audience in the first place. No longer did the commentator, such as Ben Shapiro, require the approval of any executive to start his podcast and gain access to millions of downloads directly to the phone of the end consumer. And more compellingly, there was the algorithms of social media. Facebook, Twitter, now X, and Instagram were less publishers and more organizers of digital camps. Their algorithms aimed to bring people together, but with people and with content they would engage with, which meant also with content they would agree with. This created powerful echo chambers or filter bubbles. If, for example, a prominent figure such as Candace Owens posts a viral take, it would not only be viewed by her supporters, but the platform would amplify it, ensuring it reached like-minded individuals who would share, comment, and engage with it. Finally, a new business model evolved. This new media was not supported by commercials to appeal to a very wide audience. It was supported by a direct-to-consumer approach. The media created communities of loyal patrons, and people could subscribe to them by paying fees, contributing to crowdfunding, or attending live shows. This meant that the loyalty of such media creations was to the audience and not to sponsors or network professionals. The digital catalyst offered the tools, podcasts, videos, the distribution platform, social algorithms, and the economic catalyst, direct support, that allowed a new media world to be built from the ground up. The metaphor of the gates being opened is accurate, but the walls around the gates were, in effect, torn down so that 1,000 voices could rise up. With the gates open and the tools at their disposal, a new generation of voices emerged to help shape the conservative dialogue. They were not just commentators, they were influencers, building direct relationships with their audience through a product that was radically different from the traditional establishment. At the helm of change, in terms of both form and consequence, was Trump himself. Even though he is currently under a lot of criticism, due to the fact that his name appeared in the Epstein files numerous times, we cannot deny that Trump not only leveraged the new media, he weaponized it. His command of Twitter was his superpower. He connected directly, instantaneously, and emotively to the masses, circumventing every journalist and commentator. He validated the deepest grievances of his followers, who felt the fake news media was untrustworthy. He was the pioneering politician who understood that, within the new media universe, provocation equated to engagement, and vintage believability meant little. Following this way, figures like Tucker Carlson perfect the tone. While at Fox News, his show felt like a departure from standard cable news, more conversational, skeptical of official narratives, and sharply focused on cultural and identity politics. When he left the network to take his show exclusively to Twitter/X, he proved a critical point. The audience would follow the personality, not the platform. The move symbolized the complete decentralization of influence. Meanwhile, a digital vanguard built powerful niche empires. Charlie Kirk and his organization, Turning Point USA, focused laser-like on young people, turning college campuses into cultural battlegrounds and using viral clips to build a youth movement. Candace Owens presented a formidable challenge to progressive orthodoxy by offering a sharp, media-savvy, black conservative perspective that resonated with audiences who felt traditional conversations on race were limiting. These new faces all had certain characteristics in common. They were more personal and direct, sometimes confrontational, and talked far less about policy details and more about cultural conflict and what many saw as threats to their identities and a value system, defending a way of life against a progressive elite. They did not simply report on the news, but dramatized it as a struggle, a constant conflict, making their viewers feel as if they were privy to insider information, as if they were participants in a revolution. The result was a dramatic shift in which influence could no longer be gained by virtue of the network or party endorsement. It was earned, audience member by audience member, in the new digital public square. The rise of this parallel media ecosystem has had a profound impact on American politics and society, one that is irreversible. The best way to understand this impact is within three clear contexts: engagement, the power structure, and political reality. First, activation and ownership. The alternative. Feed didn't just engage its audience, it activated them. Unlike the passive consumption of traditional TV news, this new model had followers sharing, commenting, debating, and donating. Through a day-to-day stream of analysis and talking points, they left their followers feeling armed and prepared, ready to take on political discussion. In doing so, it fostered an incredibly important sense in its base, a sense of belonging to something at work every day, rather than just an electoral base that materializes every few years. Political identity became a lived, daily experience. Second, the decentralization of power. The basic source of political energy and power to tell a story or set a narrative was no longer in the hands of party chairmen, network news presidents, or newspaper editorial boards. Suddenly, a monologue from a podcast host, a video trending from a daytime show, or a post from a major influencer could set the agenda, shape the conversation, and pressure politicians. Moreover, the path from influence or source to impact now looked like a web, not a ladder. Finally, there is a double-edged sword to this change, in that, as a method, it has helped to empower and engage millions. Yet at the same time, it has altered our national conversation in ways that are not necessarily easy to deal with, in that we are now in a fragmented information universe, in which different segments of our society are getting information from entirely different sources, with entirely different facts at their base. This is creating a reality that makes common ground quite difficult to cultivate. There is a sense in which misinformation is moving at a rapid rate within echo chambers that they have created and cannot exit. The very communities being created through these algorithms, while beneficial, could be the source of more polarization in society, based around exclusive narratives and distrust of the other side. On a more important level, the conservative movement, and as such American politics as a whole, was reaware. It is more involved, more decentralized, and more potent on its own terms. However, such revitalization was also associated with a fragmented democratic space as a result of a fragile consensus and a debatable notion of truth. The past decade's narrative, however, is not merely about the changing political leadership and policy debates, but also about the basic shift in the way the society as a whole communicates, comes together, and defines itself. The ascendance of the alternative feeds represents the end of the top-down, one-to-many model of political communication. We are no longer in a situation where there's one overall national conversation and everyone plugs into that one national conversation. We are in a situation where there are two or more parallel conversations, several robust, simultaneous flows of information and opinion to different audiences at the same time. The mainstream media, and indeed the mainstream in general, are no longer the dominant force in the lives of the overwhelming bulk of the American population. This means that to fully grasp politics today, one must do more than look at the parties or politicians' platforms or their proposed solutions to issues. One must be aware of the media system. The new leaders who emerged to prominence through the alternative feed, from Trump being to Carlson to innumerable online personalities, achieved their success because they did not merely inhabit the media world. They constructed a self-contained universe. They did not merely offer news. They delivered identity, community, and a feeling of purpose. The new political reality is this: influence has been decentralized, loyalty has been personalized, and the battlefields have become cultural and perceptual, as well as legislative, if they were ever neatly separated at all. Whatever one makes of these changes as good, bad, or both, they cannot be denied. The gates are down, the megaphones are out, and the square has become a massive digital arena, often contentious and sometimes networked. The politics of the 21st century looks like politics forged inside the feed,